everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming both in person and online. For those to make sure that you're all in the right meeting, because that happens. Welcome to the Water Use Advisory Council. I'm Laura Campbell. I serve as one of the co-chairs for this council. And what we'll do to start ourselves off, we do have quorum here in the room, which is our requirement that we've got to have quorum in the room in order to be able to conduct any votes for business. But since we do, we'll go ahead and do roll call. Just to confirm, we've got the names of everybody who is participating online as part of our recording. Excellent.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, we'll go around and introduce everyone in the room then, so that folks participating online can hear and see the folks who are here. Don't forget, as you speak, elevate, project your voice so that everyone can hear. And I'll pass it to my left to start with Brian.
I'm Brian Burrows, Michigan Trout Unlimited.
Pat Staskevich, representing American Water Works Association.
Doug Needham with the Aggregates Association.
Joel Henry, HDR.
Austin York, Conservative Energy, Building Branch.
Dave Hamilton, retired from the Nature Conservancy.
Katie Lundstrom with Bar Engineering Company.
Molly Turner with the Michigan Potato Industry Commission.
And Howard Reeves with U.S. Geological Survey.
Dave Matura, Michigan Lakes and Streams Association.
Megan Tinsley, Michigan Environmental Council.
Melissa Grassman, Jekyll Solutions.
Adam Wygant, Geologic Resources Management Division.
Jim Allen, Water Use Assessment Unit Supervisor, GRMD Eagle.
DSS Supervisor with Eagle.
Wow, throw a couple other letters in there. All right, let's do it back to the room as well. Andy, do you want to start us off?
Simon DeLeo with the Office of Great Lakes at Eagle.
Sydney Ramallo with Eagle.
Garrett Link, Eagle.
Krishna Hagerman, Eagle.
Mike Jubal, Eagle.
Megan Cameron, Eagle.
Annie Mayer, Eagle.
Matt Ventura, Eagle. All right, thanks everybody, appreciate it. First order of business, again, since we do have quorum, we'll go ahead and take care of this business here today. We need an approval of our minutes from our last meeting. And hopefully you received those either in the email that included the invitation to today's meeting or on the Water Use Advisory Council website. Any amendments, corrections to last meeting's minutes?
I wasn't able to be here, but I did notice there's a section where they refer to you as him in the whole section. I thought maybe someone else probably already alerted them to that, but if not, I think that's a correction.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make a comment. I thought they were usually good minutes. I mean, very thorough, quite accurate. Except for that.
I'll take anything except that jerk. Any other corrections or amendments to the minutes? And let me make sure as I'm reviewing here. If you're online and you want to speak, don't forget to unmute yourself or raise your hand so that we know that you're trying to speak.
I did submit one already via email. It was just an attendee from Bar who was not at the meeting.
Okay.
But I think that was received.
It was received and updated.
Yeah.
The people see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So since we don't usually do voice vote for these, I will take these as a, does anyone have objections to approving the minutes for this meeting?
With slight modification that's noted.
As amended. All right. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead next and ask if there's any additions or subtractions or amendments to today's agenda.
This is Frank Edwagishik. I have some information about August 12th meeting.
Perfect, Frank, thanks. Yep, I had a note that whenever you wanted to bring that up, either now or if you want to do it when we get to our next agenda item with comments, which we can roll into right now, unless anybody else has got another agenda item. Okay. Well, then next we normally do public comment on items related to our agenda. And since our agenda includes our next meeting, Frank, I'll let you take it away with your proposal for the August meeting.
As I spoke about once before, trying to get us to have one of our meetings at a tribal facility, I've made arrangements with Gun Lake Tribe just south of Grand Rapids to host our August 12th meeting. Tours in the morning, lunch, and then a meeting in the afternoon. I've gotten confirmation that we have a meeting room, and we haven't got the other details put together, but they will create a room block where we can make our own reservations within that block. I don't have all those details yet, but I wanted to report that we have a confirmation that they could host us on that date if the council so wishes. Thanks.
That is awesome, Frank. Thank you very much for doing that initial legwork. I don't know that we've got an official procedure for moving a meeting. We usually just take volunteers, and we're so eager to get out of Stabenow Hall that we'll take anything. So
We'll try not
Wow.
to take offense.
Yeah. Okay.
you know, I used to work for the state. I know I know and love the Cubicle Farms well. I guess some of for logistical standpoint, in addition to rooms, which folks, you know, if you need a room for travel purposes, Gun Lake is not that terribly far away from Lansing, but if you're coming in from another area and need a room, that, you know, any room costs would be your responsibility. But Frank, can we talk a little bit about lunch and what ideas we might have for being able to take care of the catering costs for lunch?
Yeah, there's a couple of possibilities. One, they prepare a really nice buffet lunch, which I was just there for a United Tribes of Michigan meeting that I organized, and they had a real nice buffet lunch. They called it Taco Truck, but it was really good salads and things, and that would be one option, and we would just have to have confirmation on the number of attendees. And once again, we would, the state doesn't have money to pay for this, so we would need to have people chip in towards lunch. There's the possibility of box lunches like we did when we were at Grand Traverse. And, it's not as convenient, but there's also a possibility they have a buffet upstairs that we might be able to use. But I would think it'd be better for us to have a working lunch and have our lunch at the table. And so that's what I would recommend, that we try to get the buffet, which was really good.
Sounds good. So if we can get kind of a tentative list of folks who plan on attending so that they have a head count, would they be able to give us kind of a ballpark of the cost so that we know kind of a per person cost for this?
Yes, that's what I would need to figure that out.
Okay. What I recommend, if folks are amenable to this, is I will work with Melissa and with Bree to get an email sent out to the council and folks who are interested in attending, to get please let us know if you're interested in attending so that we can get a head count for lunch, as well as a cost. And then we'll put a deadline date on that. How soon ahead of time does the facility need their head count? Do you know, Frank?
Well, the head count for lunch probably needs to be about 10 days out.
Okay, so that's plenty of time. Okay, so sometime, yeah, we'll set that out maybe sometime in July.
I've also made a request for a shuttle bus to take us on the tour. So we'll see how that works. I don't have confirmation on that yet, but I'm working on it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let me know details on that. And in the meantime, we'll start working on getting head counts. And we'll probably include in that message if anybody's got interest or needs accommodation for lodging, in coordination with the meeting, either for the night before, the night after. Yeah, Kelly.
If Frank has a block of rooms, they might even be able to send a link to us that we can use for that block.
Mhm.
It would be helpful in that email to send, sorry, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that once they have the block arranged, I'm only asked for like maybe 10 to 15 rooms total in the block, because I know a lot of people are gonna drive in. So, and I generally what I've done is ask for the night before, for the 11th, because we'll usually wrap up around 3:30, and I suspect most people will drive home. So I ask for the block for that night, and when they do put that together, they will send me a link to register. And so I'll put that, I'll make sure that information gets out to everybody.
Sounds good.
And you do have a brand new hotel, just don't. If they can have the tour bus stop with the loosest slots, that'd be nice.
We'll see what we can do.
Maybe an
Most of the
itinerary
meeting
for the
rooms-
day. That way if people can't go on the tour in the morning,
Mhm.
we still know when the meeting will be.
Yep.
Would be helpful.
That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you. I'll make sure and include that. Yeah. Thanks. Frank, thank you very much for reaching out and making those arrangements, and I'll get in touch with you, and we'll start planning for the August date.
Thank you.
I was looking for my open meetings manual, but, you know, sooner we can get details and correct, our online presence, and Eagle Calendar with the corrected information, location and times. I'm sure if we have that done by the end of the month, situated by the end of the month, we'll be fully,
Sounds good.
I just
Yeah,
can't,
whatever you need, just let me know, and we'll make sure it gets worked out.
don't remember off the top of my head whether it's 10 days, 20 days, 30 days.
I just remember the notification's got to come out 10 days in advance for the meeting. But
Okay.
I don't remember about anything else.
It's probably 10.
Oh, we just had a question come in if the August meeting was still going to be available online. And Frank, you do have, the tribe has internet connection at their meeting room, right?
Yes, I've confirmed that they have internet. In fact, I was just there. I know I've used it there. So
Okay,
I
perfect.
know it works, and they even put in the basement room where hopefully that's the room we use. If that's the room we use, they put a booster there to boost the signal for the basement. So they did that, and so I know that people will be able to call in. We could set up a Teams call, and people could call in, and that also they have monitors. There's 3 monitors around the room, so that you could see them from everywhere for any presentations that occur. And the room is small enough to hold everybody. It's not a huge room, but it's also big enough for the meetings. And I know we usually use owls to to bring everybody in. So I think I'm used to the technology that we use for the meetings. I'm pretty sure everything's going to work there. I don't have nothing's 100%. There's always Murphy's Law, but we were just using the internet in that room for a 6-hour meeting just recently.
Yeah, we should be all set to still provide a hybrid format for the meeting then. So those who are not able to make it in person can still participate. Sounds excellent. We'll go ahead and start working on details on that. And as soon as we get stuff put together, we'll let everybody know and let everybody get a chance to sign up for the lunch and also to make arrangements if they need a hotel room. Thank you, Frank. Any other public comments? We will do another opportunity for public comments for general items, but for now, we're looking for agenda-related stuff. And I am hearing and seeing none. So I think we will go ahead and close this, and we will move on to our next agenda item. And I am going to pass chairmanship over to Brian. Is that right? Okay.
All right, for committee chair reports, we'll start with the data committee for the meeting last month.
Oh,
And-
actually, I'm so sorry, Brian. I forgot to tell you that, and I couldn't remember if you were included in the email. Data conservation or the conservation and efficiency committee asked if they could go first because they've got somebody who's presenting for their updated report. It can't stay long.
Got it.
Yeah, so
I see that, yeah. Please go ahead. Conservation and efficiency.
All right, well, we do have Janine Schweihofer from MSU online, and she's going to give an update on the MSU generally accepted, or no, she's giving her update on where the irrigation team is and kind of what's going on with that. So to refresh people who might be new, that was funding we received 2 years ago, and so they are in full swing. So Janine, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm ready. Thank you, Kelly. So I'm Janine Schweihofer. I'm the Associate Institute Director of Agriculture and Agribusiness with MSU Extension. Really glad to be here. Sorry I couldn't be here in person, and I'm multitasking with some different commitments today. So I'm the one reason for the out of order agenda item. Thank you for the accommodation. Really, we're excited to be able to work on this project and have the collaboration and the funding. And so the use of the funds have been used to hire 2 water use efficiency extension educators. We hired Angie Gradas in May of last year and Brendan Kelly in August of last year. And they work with the rest of our irrigation team, Dr. Young Suk Dong, who's in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources in Biosystems Ag Engineering, and with our irrigation educator, Lyndon Kelly, MSU Extension. And so together they're a small but mighty irrigation team, but specifically related to the funding for the project and the work of the 2 educators, Angie and Brendan. We've formed a consultative committee as part of the project where there's different representations from industry and agencies and farmers and irrigation suppliers to give some direction to the project and to the educators. So they've met twice with a third meeting coming up after the needs assessment results will be compiled. So they've been working this past winter. They've created a needs assessment for both field and specialty crops as well as livestock producers. And those results will be compiled this summer and used this fall, late summer and fall, to plan the winter programming and future program direction of the work that the educators will do. But in the meantime, they've been busy working with the irrigation team. They presented at several winter meetings this past winter. They've written articles. They're writing weekly updates for irrigation management and scheduling, timing needs. They're working on different fact sheets and bulletins, and they've shared articles on timely irrigation scheduling tools, the new MSU irrigation app, which provides some of those technologies all in one app, and it's available on both Apple and Android platforms in both English and Spanish. They've also been working on updating the website. It's not been updated yet, but they're doing the work behind the scenes, so that should be updated in the next month or 2. And then this summer, they're going to be very busy out, again, visiting with growers, learning and seeing and doing more, working with some of the research projects in Dr. Dong's laboratory, but also presenting and educating farmers and agri-industry related to water use efficiency. And so a few of the events, they'll be at some partner events, but a few of the MSU Extension events that they will be either leading or participating in and sharing irrigation knowledge are the Beginning Farmer Field Day on July 22nd. That's at the West Central Research Center. On August 1st, they're going to have a summer irrigation workshop at Kellogg Biological Station, or KBS. They'll be at the Potato Field Day, August 7th, the Newaygo County Farm Field Day, August 19th, the Blueberry Field Day, September 10th at the Trevor Nichols Research Center. And then for the end of this calendar year is always the Great Lakes Expo, and they'll be participating in that on December 10th with some irrigation breakouts. There may be some other opportunities that aren't on that list, but they're both eager and well-educated and up and running and looking to help share water use efficiency education with farmers and others.
Right. And any questions before we let Ginny?
Janine, this is Debbie. Can we get a list of those events that we could post?
Yes, we will send a list.
Other questions? Thanks for participating, Janine, and multitasking today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate the collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of pairing up with that is the recommendation 2 years after that one on ag irrigation, water and energy efficiency. That pilot program, Andy sent out kind of the write-up that we did that got approved, and he asked for comments from our committee, and we had some really good comments back out. So thanks to Abby for always really helping to clarify exactly what it is we need these groups to do and what this money is to be used for. Andy has added those comments to the scope of work for that, and the grant is being developed currently, so moving forward. We do have the state climatologist, Dr. Jack Andreessen, who's going to be presenting on climate trends and their impacts on agriculture. Of course, in that is we're always talking about climate migration as well and what these impacts may have on that. They'll be at the August 7th committee meeting. And I think there's another slide.
Is that going to be in person or?
August 7th, it's virtual. Yeah, it's virtual. We don't do any in person. Yeah, everybody's spread out so far. We get a better turnout with the in-person, but thanks for asking. I mean, if you want to meet someplace, you and I can sit at the computer somewhere. That would work. The Alliance for Water Efficiency has been working on the Conservation Best Management project. They presented at our last meeting, and I believe that we asked for them to have time on the full council's meeting coming up. So I'll kind of just give some highlights because I don't think I need to overlap too much with what they'll be presenting, but their project focused on the business and the industry sectors. And their goal was to find out how sectors use the 2008 best management practices that were collected way back then. It seems like it was so long ago. And to see if any sectors have updated or have innovations to that list, and to really foster those peer-to-peer connections from that. There is a subgroup of the Alliance for Water Efficiency called the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. We got acronyms like crazy. They worked with the non-business and the industry partners, so public water, non-ag irrigation groups. Public water utilities are looking for water conservation opportunities to curb the need for infrastructure expansion. Agriculture irrigation really has a well-defined process called generally accepted agricultural management practices, and that is reviewed annually. The non-ag irrigation focus on golf courses, and generally the non-ag irrigation group does not have updated best management practices, but some portions like the golf industry does. And so I think that's going to be an area that could be focused on in the future. The Alliance for Water Efficiency also provided examples to the group of different businesses that have specific water BMPs, but not industry-wide. And they found that having corporate champions internally is a key for best management practice development and implementation. And I guess I'd say that goes back to that trust factor that we continue to talk about in this group. The original BMPs from 2008 were strong, but they identified that there still are opportunities to enhance them And they presented some options to explore kind of increasing those or making those better. So that's their presentation in a nutshell. Their presentation is going to be way cooler than the one I just gave you. Does anyone have any questions?
Kelly, they'll probably talk about this in August, but does this group focus at all on residential water use?
Ooh, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
Sandy, I didn't see you. You snuck in, aren't you?
Well, they're focused on business and industry.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I have. Next meeting, August 12th.
Any other questions for conservation and efficiency? I'm looking forward to it. Their step with it. Thank you.
This is, maybe comment, that this work that you're doing gets routed to like the Council of Great Lakes Governor and their compact to show what states doing in terms of the efficiency goals of the compact.
So I believe this goes through the Office of the Great Lakes that Emily is working with, and that's a really good question. I'm not sure exactly where that all go.
Well, it's to address every year or every other year. The state put together a paper on that and that's the thing. And this was directly out to the comments that came.
Okay. I figured they were connected, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
In recent years, water conservation and efficiency has been one of the priorities for the science advisory team to focus on for the Compact Council regional body meetings.
All right, thanks. Data collection committee did have a meeting and we used about 2 hours just to get caught up on all the different projects that are in various phases of being implemented and overseen by different collections, whether it's audit subcommittees, audit committees, data committee. Some of them are, offshoots that USGS is working on or even staff work on. So we really just use the opportunity to communicate about those, make sure that we started developing a list to keep track of all of them and who the leads are. We have sent out a poll for the next meeting. It looks like we're down to July 9th or 10th as being available. Not perfect ability of course for everybody. I think it's Megan's intent to finalize, choose one of those two and end of the day or tomorrow morning. So because there are plenty of people who haven't responded yet, if you're interested in making that, you haven't, please finish the poll. So it may be the tiebreaker and probably by tomorrow we'll get out a note on which of the 2 dates and it'll be the 9th or 10th. Questions or additions from anybody participating? Any questions from any participants online?
Frank.
Yeah. Excuse me, I muted myself again. One of the issues I've had with a lot of the tribal data is that much of the federal data that we rely on has, due to reorganization, has become either lost or more difficult to gather. I wonder if you're aware of any effort to preserve any data that we rely on at the federal level within the state or the state organizations.
Open it up for others to answer that, but I'll say the general impression that I have is yes, definitely. I think between the states, well, the 2 state efforts to make databases of all water data, I'm sure that's included. And I know Judith Howard was sending some emails about trying to also capture a lot of stream temperature data lately. So I think there's more so than ever, there's sort of efforts that go beyond one sort of agency or organizational silo to capture available data from multiple sources.
And Frank, are you talking about tribal data from groups that have, you know, that have sort of been officially designated to run their own either water quality programs or water systems, or are you just talking generally data collected across the state by the feds?
Well, one of the things that we've related, that's been related to us, is that the people who are working on helping tribes establish their systems, there's been offices have been closed and there's been layoffs. And so some of the data that they've stored has become less accessible. And those are things that that's just one thing from a tribal point of view. And I was just wondering, you know, on other things, we also know that there's, you know, some concerns about what's going to happen. As an example, when we did the plan for the preservation and restoration of the Great Lakes, there was an EPA website that had all this information on it. And during the former Trump administration, that website was taken down, and all that data, if you hadn't stored it locally, you had no access to it anymore. And so I was just concerned that anything that we may rely on for our work, that anything that is potentially in jeopardy, that we make sure that we have state backups so that we're able to continue to function.
Okay, and is that EPA Office of Water that the tribes have been working with?
I forget the actual which one it is, because this has to do with installing water systems and sanitation. I don't think it's part of the EPA water office, but I'm not positive exactly where that is in the bureaucracy. I know the office is in Traverse City, and that was one of the offices that they let the lease go on. So that office doesn't exist now.
I know one thing we've been doing as an organization is we've been reaching out to contacts at USDA headquarters to let them know when we're having challenges with either offices closing or, you know, or staff not being there to provide stuff that's needed for farmers. So if we can kind of track down who we need to be reaching out to at EPA about this to share concerns about lack of staffing, lack of data, lack of office stuff. I mean, that we're happy to carry that forward. Although I think the more people who do it, the more weighted it has. If there's other people who have those connections. Frank, do you mind following up maybe via email, or if you can find out some more specifics on who it is that you've been working with and the tribes have been working with in EPA, so that anybody who's got connections with headquarters office can make sure and raise that concern.
Any insights? I know you're not, but do you have any insights from USGS?
No. I'm glad I'm not EPA. They're really getting hit hard on their Office of Research and Development. So it's getting zeroed out. So I guess they're getting the crosshairs. I think since we're not regulatory, people are fairly happy with the data we put out. So we haven't had any issues. On a happier news, you were talking about the temperature data. We mentioned when we were working with Eagle on the work plan that we would potentially include more temperature information in stream gauges. And boy, they got a ton of interest across the state. And we had some local data. We talked to universities, and all these people are like, well, I have data, I can throw it in. So one of our staff members is working on a data release that will be, it'll indicate what agency or group it came from, the data came from at the time period, and quality assurance type information we have all in one place, so people can start looking at trends and just the amount that's out there. There's not very many real-time temperature records that you could just look at. We had a handful of them, mostly associated with FERC licensing, and a few on the coast with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. But when you start throwing everybody together, there's a lot of data that's around. So we're really excited about that data release.
Is there a way that you guys are putting out there, like, here's the specifications for data quality assurance?
Right now, we're just reaching out to each group and saying, you know, do you want to participate? And then we'll have to have some kind of indicator of what kind of quality assurance they do, whether it's like calibration of the little tidbits, or they're uncalibrated, you get what they need, or we'll make some kind of categorization of this product.
Because I'm sure they didn't have your specifics, like this is how it should be done type of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of the problem with us is in order for us to publish temperature data, we get really picky. And so then we don't end up publishing it because it's expensive to be that picky. We have a lot of USGS data that like didn't meet our standards. But we're going to put it in and say, this is temperature data. It's not to a tenth of a degree or whatever, but it might be to a degree or half a degree. But maybe that's all you need. And a lot for some decisions. And I think the same thing with other groups that, you know, have been more or less thinking about how, you know, there's there are these little electronic buttons about how. So, yeah, I think it'll be a cool data release that'll be really available through a system called ScienceBase. That'll be like zip file or something, so we can go to and download and shape file you know, locations and stuff. So I think we have Trout Unlimited, enthusiastically responded, MSU, U of M, our data. The DNR has a lot of data that the Student Fisheries Research had a lot. Forest Service had some. So
It'll be cool to have lots of data because we keep saying we need data. The one thing that I'll just throw out there is if we are requiring people for site-specific reviews and other things to meet a certain criteria for the information or the data they submit, we have to be really careful that we're not holding them to that standard when the data that we're throwing out there and going to be comparing them to may not have those specifics. So at some point, we might need to talk about like what data meets some sort of threshold, right? That
It'll probably be, I mean, the first step, right, is knowing what's out there. And then how it was collected, what purposes it was collected for. Eventually, we'll have to, and not that far off, we'll have to talk about those, whether there's certain collection protocol, QA, QC type of standards for different types of uses. But we've done that work to come those years ago. Referred to like a USGS or like BMP, you know, best management practices, or it really wasn't. It was just a guidance document for stream temperature data collection for the purpose of long-term climate monitoring, climate change monitoring. So it really wasn't like a governmental agency. Here's the set protocol. You must in every situation. It was for this purpose. Here's what you should do and how you should do it. So kind of known that project on the data collection and when that came in, our committee needs to work with that too and say what did we learn from a pretty robust effort, but what did we learn from that 3-year effort? What did we like? What else we like for data that we intend to use like for specific purpose in this program? So that's all to come. But the very first step is usually just what is out there and how was it done and looking at that. So it's pretty glad to see that effort. Just to finish up on Frank's, on the state efforts, both big internal one, and then I know the huge amount of overlap with the integrated water management database concept. How far off is it before those efforts do start sort of downloading data up to date from all the sources identified?
It really depends which one you're talking about. We have one that is a multi-year project that's probably going to be, 5 years before the thing is really in a format that we're envisioning. But the water management database, the one that's being built alongside the MHF, that one has a deadline of next year. So next year, but that's under development right now. And then I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. Those are the two that are coming to mind right now. And then, obviously Howard is collecting all of that other data that will be also done by the end of next year. So, I mean, really, it's over the next year that a lot of this stuff will start to become, incorporated and then available. So. Oh, sorry. Yep. The Michigan Hydrologic Framework. Yep. Sorry. Yeah.
Trying to keep them all that great.
Yep.
A lot of what they're trying to do is not do static downloads. There's so much available as a service. So the development group is working on taking it, bringing all the services together so that when you take an area, it gets those services and brings the data rather than the state having to store a bunch of stuff and then do a refresh every now. There'll be some of that. Some of it is like snapshot. So
Perfect. Any other questions about data committee? Okay. Thank you. Models committee.
All right. So last time we had a pretty detailed discussion of the Michigan Hydrologic Framework, MHF. And so the work is continuing to progress. We had a meeting this morning, just getting updates as to where things are moving along on all fronts. And so what I'm thinking is in a few months, we'll have them come back and an update when they can show us some mock of what's how it's going to work, what's going to look like. I think that'll be quite useful to see some updates. But it was interesting just listening to some of the discussions, like what they call ingesting models. So how you going to take a model, how you going to check it, how's that going to work? So we're having that discussion. A lot of details that need to be worked out and decisions made as to how this can be done. But that's what I want to add. And they've been bringing in some models just to see, okay, how can we do it? What's it like? And we're going to do what they call a stress test, which is bringing a really big model and see how the system responds to that. And with that, that's going to give them information. So, okay, how do they design things long term? The overall server is probably what's going to work on, what we will handle the system designed. So I was encouraged by listening to some of the details of how they're thinking through these things. As they look at some of the database stuff that are that come up with some better ideas as how to handle that. And I'm glad they thought of that now as opposed to later. But anyway, things are progressing in that. So we'll come back in a few months with a more detailed update. The last meeting, I told you about a product that we had heard about, which was called Aqueduct. And it was developed by the World Resource Institute. And at that point, I didn't really know anything about it except that. But we had a meeting the next day. So I just wanted to report back on that meeting because there seemed to be some interest in this thing. And what they do is they've got this global scale model that looks at water risk. And it's done at a global scale. And as we talked, it was real clear, they're kind of proud of doing it at a global scale. So no matter where you are, you kind of got the same density of information, the same kind of quality of data that's behind it. What that means if you get into a place like the Great Lakes, where you've got a very unique hydrogeologic settings, very unique geology, huge lakes, system doesn't work very well. And they kind of deliberately staying away from the kind of detailed data sets that we have in Great Lakes. So I found that very disappointing. So kind of the bottom line is that if you want to look at something very big scale, make gross comparisons, that's kind of what it's designed to do. Now, they did indicate some interest of maybe looking at, do they follow?
Did not.
Okay, so anyway, we offered to share, we have in Great Lakes, but it's pretty clear their mission is much different than looking at the Great Lakes. So bottom line is it's missions for us. We've also been meeting, we had another meeting with the SSR technical work group. And we had some really good discussion and kind of what we've been dealing with is Todd's brought this some data that he showed that said you get some real situations and you pump test and looking at monitoring irrigation was the analytics models don't necessarily do a good job in some of those situations. And that's kind of what you would expect. Analytical model has certain assumptions. If you meet those assumptions, well, like, that is the answer. But the further you are away from those assumptions, then the further off the model is. And what we talked about, and what seems to be where the group is going, is that in a screening tool, it's fine. That's what we're trying to do. We've got a simple model, conservative, and at this point, we don't see that we're going to want to make changes there. But when we get into site-specific reviews, we really need to not just hang on to, well, let's try a different analytical model or something, but let's really try to understand what are the data telling us and how do we more adequately evaluate it. And so we're moving in that direction, which I think is a good direction to go. And so we'll be working on that, we'll come back with any recommendations or decisions that we make there. So that's where that work is at.
Dave, before you go on, do you mind if I ask a quick question about that? So as you're looking at sort of what do you do when you have a situation where an analytical model isn't a good fit, you know, and you might need something different to do that analysis. Are you looking at like what would be needed for someone to submit a custom model, or what's your thought about what would be the outcome of that discussion?
People be encouraged by the information they have in schedule. So that if Todd has done a pump test or he's been monitoring wells in the area for some period of time, that kind of information is really critical. Fine. And then that would become part of the SSR review. The department would use that information in their evaluation. So at this point, we're probably not going to get real restrictive as to what would be done, as opposed to these kind of things that we can do. And this information is going to be very helpful. I think that's not more.
Okay.
Any other questions on that? So anyway, we will keep moving on that, and I think we have good working on it because we have different viewpoints represented on it, and very high degree of technical experience. It's a good group to work with. The last thing I want to do is have Katie talk about the transition accountability for this thing.
Yeah, so we're currently working on phase 2 of the transitional probability mapping. Just as a reminder, phase 1 was the step where we were just collecting the data, doing some kind of data screening and cleaning, so to speak. So that's been completed. For phase 2, that's kind of the meat of the transitional probability mapping. So it's running the statistics and generating these 3-dimensional outputs of these aquifer types. So basically the input data that is in the WellLogic database. We met with Eagle and Dave Lush as the head of the work group a number of weeks ago, presented some preliminary results, and ultimately decided to test out some different model settings. So these are things like how big are the grid cells for this 3-dimensional space that we're modeling. Sorry, backing up. And so these are models of Cass County and Calhoun County are the 2 that we're working on. And then some other inputs, kind of input parameters to the modeling. So we have completed those adjustments. Now we're just working on a report of this phase 2 work, which will go to Eagle as a draft for their review and input. And then from there, if we're in agreement on phase 2, we'll move on to phase 3. Phase 3 is the validation step of it. So it's taking the data that we withheld from the model, comparing it to the results, and providing a summary of like a goodness of fit. So like how well did the phase 2 results kind of match the data that was withheld for the phase 3 evaluation.
I guess, is there a geologic setting that you expected to work better in or worse in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's still under evaluation, right? And that's kind of some of the things that we've been looking at, just in terms of, does this output look like what we would expect? And I think the short answer is there's probably different ways you could do it by sort of enforcing more of the like hydrogeologic or geologic structure on it and combining that with the modeling. Another thing we've looked at in the literature a little bit is sort of how people are using it in terms of how many different like categories they're modeling. So for us, we're using what's in WellLogic, which is, there's aquifer, there's confining material, marginal aquifer, and potentially confining. I think there's some indication in the literature that the fewer of those you have, kind of, right, the less sort of scattered the results look. So I don't have a firm answer on that yet, but I think that's going to be a topic of discussion.
So it's been tricky because it was developed like for these Olympic bands or something.
Right.
Very-
Yeah, like applying it
very
to a
later
specific.
kind of system. So
Yep. Right.
systems in Michigan that would follow that, you would expect would fit pretty well. So, something more stuff.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested in seeing the results.
Yep.
But that's it from us, unless there's any questions on us.
Questions? We're good about this, we'll let you know. Or more implementation.
We don't have anything to report. Last time we did a comprehensive reporting there, all of the different steps. We'll schedule a meeting in the near future, so provide an update for the office.
Excellent. All right, I think that concludes the committee reports.
All right. So next up is item 7, legislative report recommendations.
Pretty much the same as where at least I was with the Senate. There's a placeholder in there, but the budget process isn't going along like it should. Very slow. So, and some other folks working are real working with the house people on the same thing. So it's looking favorable, but nobody knows at this point.
We're making sausage.
They are, and just if I can make a quick addition to what Dave reported, our team has been contacting potential sponsors in the House for the budget earmark, and is ready to testify in support of the council's recommendations. So, as soon as we get some reply from them on their level of interest in taking this up and adding it as an earmark to the budget, we'll jump on that and make sure and have our team coordinate with you so that you can be letting folks on the Senate side know.
So
the conversations have been very positive, like every representative that our team has talked to downtown, when we tell them, hey, this is why it's important, this is what the council's doing, this is what's being recommended. Everybody's been real supportive and saying, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Let's figure out a way to get this done.
sounds like we're well positioned. We just have to wait for timing.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thanks for your help, everybody who's been involved. Any questions on this? Seeing online? All right, we'll move on to the next one. We've got the Eagle update.
Yeah.
Big lead on.
All right. Good afternoon. This is the program update for Eagles Water Use Program. We're going to start out with sharing some metrics for the Part 327 water use program. Permits, pre-screening reviews that we do for Eagles Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division, the equivalent of SSR for public water supply. And then the tool and site-specific review registrations, site-specific review timeliness, and site-specific review categories. Give an update on water management area depletion status, updates on the development of statewide groundwater monitoring network and becoming a new data provider to the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. Brief update on updates to the water withdrawal assessment tool and the stream flow depletion tools that we use. And then finally, a personnel note for water use assessment unit. So 327 permits, calendar year 2025 to date. One has been issued, two are currently under review. The pre-screening reviews that we do for drinking water and environmental health, essentially the same as a site-specific review, and then drinking water does other things over and above what we do to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. Calendar year 2025, so 9 total. 4 ended up being Zone A, 2 Zone B, 1 Zone C, 1 Zone D, and 1 is pending. Compliance numbers for compliance communications, 18 total. 14 of those were revised registrations, so if a withdrawal is installed and or operated differently than what was authorized by either the tool or the site-specific review, if there's sufficient stream flow available to authorize the as-built as operated, we issue a revised registration. Then for installation verification, so we're contacting the property owner to verify whether the registered withdrawal had been installed or not. Yeah.
One is, are the number of these types, that's went up, down, is pretty much steady.
The permits, the 327, 23 permits themselves. Andy, you want to? Sir, I don't know if there's a trend per se.
Did have a run at like 9 of 10 water withdrawals were all the sand and gravel, new sand and gravel sites. So we had both of those. That's right now that's quieter. So now it's more constructed water. So yeah, there's no trends with them. It kind of just relates to specific projects that they might be doing.
And then my second question is, in Zone D, as I recall the law, that actually public water supply could go into a Zone D. I think they have to show that they don't have another option, but sort of what happens in this case when it goes Zone D.
That would be up to Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division. So you're correct that if the division decides that, yeah, it is in the interest to go ahead and authorize that, they could. But we would, essentially what we're doing is we're comparing it to the 32706C criteria and saying that, no, we couldn't pass it as is.
What was the term that we were exploring? Was it reasonably? There was some exception that was under that, and I can't remember the attorney's legal clause, which was really gray. We were talking about maybe looking at seeing what feasible. I think it's the solution of economically infeasible, then we can go in a different direction, but at least that's it. So I think you're right, there's an open there, but where that leads, this stuff said that we've been used to that, but not that I'm aware of.
Has not been used, and it's drinking water and environmental
Citation.
no feasible or prudent alternative.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
What's the citation there, Andy?
Yeah, 325.1004A.
We have a work group on figuring out what reasonably prudent. And I'm going. Thanks, Jim, for that rabbit trail.
And then statistics, so calendar year to date, 125 auto pass registrations by the water withdrawal assessment tool. And then we received another 67 site-specific review requests. And the next slide is going to talk about the results of our SSR reviews to date. So in 2025, 56 registrations were issued. Another 8 SSR requests were retracted by applicants. And so far, we haven't had any denials, and we have 2 SSRs pending as of this date that just came in June 4th, I believe. Top graph is the average number of business days from receipt. Statutory requirement is that we're supposed to get those done within 10 business days. So that shows the trend over time from 2009 up to 2025. Bottom graph is the percentage of SSRs that were completed within the 10 business days. More recently, we've talked about categorizing SSRs into 3 categories: administrative, desktop, and technical reviews. So as of June 3rd, we received 11. January to June 3rd. 8 of those fell under the administrative category that is more dealing with replacing existing baseline and/or registered capacity. 3 desktop reviews. 2 of those were baseline capacity replacements. 3 Zone A, 3 Zone B, 3 Zone C. So that should be.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah.
How many of the SSRs involve submission of new data or models? In other words, how many SSRs required a scientific review of new data?
I'll get to that in the next slide. So 9 of 11 were completed within 10 business days. The other 2 that were late were due to staff workloads. Okay, I've also gone back and compiled statistics on SSRs that have taken longer than 10 days. 8 of those I would categorize as technical. 2 of those debit the Skunk Creek, Wolf Creek water management areas, which are mostly in Montcalm County. Those are water management areas where USGS had done a study. And currently we've got staff in the groundwater data unit developing modeling. Another 4 of those SSRs would debit the Prairie River headwaters, water management area 20781, which, as we've talked about in previous meetings, DNR Fisheries is in year 3 of a 3-year study looking at whether that stream temperature classification should be changed. Currently, it's classified as warm. We have 1 pending SSR in the Dickinson Creek Water Management Area 3452 in Calhoun County. That's in addition to the 2 that we just authorized for Ceres Farms. And one other SSR pending that was in Osborne Drain, which was part of the Cass County pilot study that lies in portions of Cass and Van Buren counties.
Was that being helped to those studies?
We got, we're going to be verifying this due to staff change. So, but we requested, and I believe we received the raw data from USGS as well as their modeling results. So no, we don't want to hold off on waiting for publication of the final report. So correct. Now, like I said, we just wrapped up the model review and actually just authorized the 2 Ceres Farms SSRs. There's a 3rd SSR debiting that same water management area. So that's the next one we've got to come back to. Prairie River Power. Okay. So your question about that?
Is that
Correct. Yeah, because potentially if it's classification is changed to a more restrictive classification than the current warm, then we would be potentially putting it further into zone D. We don't want to do that.
When I'll make a recommendation because there are a lot of farmers that are watching the Prairie River study very, very closely. The more information that we can get out there to them, whether it's the folks directly in Branch County or kind of more broadly with, with other farmers who are watching what happens with that study, given that it's kind of going to set the precedent for how this is done in the future. The more that can be shared, the more information we get out there or education or outreach ahead of that decision, I think the better prepared people will be to, be able to make adjustments if needed, depending on what the classification ends up being. And I know that that's NRC and DNR director and all that stuff, but I'm hoping that they are keeping in communication with you guys.
Yes, was Jay Wesley on by any chance?
I am on. Yeah, I'm open to suggestions on how we communicate the information. We've just kind of been sitting on it now because we committed to 3 years of study. So we really don't have anything to report out at this time other than I can share the first 2 years of results.
Yeah,
But if you can suggest a good process to go out to the community and present that information, I would certainly love that and would do it.
Okay, absolutely. Yep, I'll get in touch with farmers in Grant County and with our leadership and see what they suggest for outreach and education.
Good.
Jake, do you have a date when you think you might have the information that you've been gathering together and looked at and have a decision kind of made by? Because then I could work backwards with helping with, do we try to get you to speak at conferences? And it also, I think some people are watching this very closely and others are kind of just coming into the conversation. So even going back as far as, what brought this study about and why is it important? I mean, it might sound a little bit ridiculous to you guys because we've been so on top of this and intermixed with this for the last few years. But I think we can help stave off, some of the pitchforks and things that might come from this with education. And I know a lot of the commodity groups would be happy to share those articles and different things and create a dialogue now, maybe even collect some questions that people have that then could help us inform you of like, where do they have questions and where is maybe that trust gap that we can help fill before we get to the point of the final information rolling out, whatever the decision is going to be.
Do you feel like a Eagle webpage would be helpful where we coordinate with DNR, but we put some of that history on and where the project is so that there's a place for updates? I mean,
because we could share it regularly.
Yeah.
Right. And I am running across people who are still like, hey, I heard from so-and-so, this is happening, and they are just finding out about it years later. Right. But now it's on their radar. So having some of that history and information that we can, a place to direct them to, I think would be really helpful.
we do that on like mining sites that garner a lot of interest, and then also incidents, like if we have large scale fires or things in our oil gas side of our business. And that's really effective because townships or whoever, they can easily point people to that link. That link gets heavily shared. You guys can share that and it can be a starting point for communication.
The timing doesn't work out great because the contractor has to provide their report back to DNR by February, right, Jay? And then we're looking at probably through the spring and maybe even into August for the NRC meeting where the director is going to announce the decision. But we could start, with a web page and be planning on like kind of winter meeting season, where can we put in presentations on here's what's going on with this to prep people. Yeah. Who else do we need to wrap into this from a commodity perspective?
I almost would think that MDARD would be good because then they're in contact with technical commodity groups. From your during the commodity group meeting, I think just anywhere and everywhere, maybe even if Sarah could mention this at the Protect Our Produce Coalition meetings, that almost anywhere.
Okay, okay. Yeah, sounds good. Let's connect afterwards and we'll kind of, we'll figure out a rough sketch of some plans to get information out to growers.
So anybody has anything, Laura will be the point on that.
Well, I'd like to, I know Jay was trying to jump in and he's in the driver's seat, but for me and the data committee, I would say there's two steps, right? Jay's on year 2, data collection on year 3 is being done right now. Maybe in February they'll have a report. The DNR, according to the legislation, really has its full open authority to use whatever process and looking at that data to decide. It's not defined in statute, it's just up to the NRC and it's been determined that it's to the director. So what I would guess is sometime by February, there'll be all the data in. And we need, all of us also would like a chance to look at the data. The DNR will do the same thing. It'll look at the final results and then start figuring out how it influences what direction they want to take with the reclassification. And then when they have an idea of what they're using the data for and what decisions and what timeline they might take action, it can be anything, right? DNR director can do this reclassification really in any month if they so choose. It was designed to follow the NRC process so that there'd be two months of public notice, ample kind of public notice, but the DNR director, if that's what the AG's legal interpretation was, is that our statute that said the NRC had the authority to do it, it's been shifted to the director. The director really doesn't have to necessarily follow the 2-month posting. So it's a little complicated, but that's to mean that it's pretty far off in all likelihood before the department can review final data and then set up this whole process of what they think about it and when they're going to take action. So I know it is good to be proactive on communicating with community members. I would say from the data committee standpoint, we'd also just maybe like if there's value, we would like to take a look at the 2 years of data and start seeing what lessons and what we've learned from it. Certainly we wait till the 3rd year and final report was collected to really do that analysis, but data committee handled, I think, had like 6 or 7 hours over 2 or 3 meetings discussion. It might have been one of the most talked about topics we've had. And earlier we mentioned like there isn't that data collection and standards protocol for the purpose of stream reclassification. And so the group really took its best shots, all collaboratively, of saying what elements they'd like to see in temperature data collection. And Jay really took that and he went forward and turned it into a scope of work. But there was a lot of topics in there where I think the committee also needs to go back and look and say, how did that best shot that we thought, how did it work out? There was a good more in the weeds than this, but there was a few topics where we're like, let's do it this way. We'll compare these ones, we'll compare these ones, we'll compare them with here, sort of regional stuff. So we might have an idea going forward. Streams might be classified. We recommend a standard set, some sort of a protocol going forward. So that's me babbling for a bit, saying there's a bunch of steps along the pathway to this. So, and I think Jay's going to need time to get a final report digested as a department, maybe hear from this body of how we feel about using that data towards reclassification. So then, being respectful to them, they can decide ultimately how they want to use the data in that decision-making process, since it is really not defined in the statute. So I think it's good to start proactively sharing, but I would just want to let everybody know, like there's probably a bunch of different phases of it. We'll be glad. We're sort of planning with the data committee when the time's right to start taking a look. Jay.
Yeah, my original timeline, I was thinking we would need enough time to digest it internally and probably would bring it maybe in August 2026 time period to the NRC. But if you have other meetings and other reviews you want to do, we can offset that. We're not in a huge rush. We want to make sure we're communicating well with the community and with the data committee. So start thinking of how you want us to review it with different groups, and we can adjust our timeline.
I guess, Pat, to more detail to your question, I definitely don't want to be the gatekeeper for information to this group. Yeah, I just want to help where I can, and it sounds like, and sounds like I get to volunteer Kelly to do that too, to help with outreach to farmers.
That's what I'm
Okay.
specifically referring to the farmer, because
Yep.
there's a lot of discussion on that.
Yep.
I would offer to Jay too, that this group is certainly the larger group, the Water Use Advisory Council, certainly a venue that you could present that information, or the data committee. But it sounds like the data committee should be the point.
I bet you this one's interesting enough.
I would think so too. But I mean, as far as the timing of when it's ready, I assume that you'll be the contact on figuring out when to plug that in. It's fine too. It's fine. All right.
Okay, and then
Back to Jim.
the final two pending SSRs were categorized as desktop, both of which involve currently the water use staff are waiting for the property owners and or the agents to identify what existing baseline capacity and or registered capacity they want to replace in order to free up additional stream flow to authorize those two pending SSRs.
That Jim put that day together. Hopefully that paints a good picture for you on both how the program's doing in 2025, but these 10 or so that fall into this category that are over the 30 days that the council wanted us to track. You know, they're over 30 days. They're in fact pre-2025, and that gives you a snapshot, I guess, of where those each are.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
All right, this is actually my slide. We had some questions about how we review groundwater models or otherwise, approve, quote unquote, any of the data that is submitted to us. And I just wanted to clarify that we don't actually approve groundwater models. Really what we do is we validate them. So we're not saying that one model is necessarily better than the other, as they're non-unique solutions that can all honor the same type of data that's collected and then entered into them. But essentially what we do is it's really a one-to-one correlation. We look at the information that's present in the data or in the model, and we correlate that then with available data that's either submitted, collected and submitted by, whoever it is that collected and submitted the data, or then also compare it to state available data sets or literature references. And really we try to make it as clear as we possibly can, right? Because at the end of the day, it should be something that everyone is able to understand why we're making these decisions. And then you should be able to ask for and receive the feedback as to why the decision has been given to you as it has been. Do you have any questions?
That's one that I brought up. I don't expect a full presentation on this, but so what drove this is I'm getting questions from the countryside because everybody's very excited about the updates that the department's making, the interface update and all, and all the work going on in models. And I've been, giving all that to our board and our county leaders, and they've been asking, okay, well, what if I make a model for some data that I've collected and I submit it, how does Eagle know that my model's right? Or in the alternative, if they make a model to figure out how my data works, how do I know that what they created is right? And so that's kind of the direction that those questions are coming from. It is, and probably approval is not the right word for it, but maybe we can chat a little bit more about kind of like, how do you validate a model that's submitted, as a custom model or what opportunity does then a user have if you guys create a model to, to figure out what's the best fit for making that decision. how do they take a look kind of under the end, under the hood of what's been built?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think that that's your ability to do. I mean, everything that we make here at the state is available, through whatever request you guys wanted to send in to us. And if you wanted to see and have access to that, you could. But in terms of looking at other people, third-party models, really, I mean, it's, like I said, we try to keep it pretty straightforward. So we just validate the geology. So if you give us a groundwater model and you used a hydraulic conductivity value that would be indicative of clay, then when we look at the boring logs for that area, then we expect to see clay. And if we don't, then, we'll note that as an exception. And really what we do throughout the process is we'll note exceptions that are like that. So if you have a recharge value that's consistent, with data that's available, we just validate that. If we have geology information that's consistent with what's available, then we validate that. And then at the end, after we've kind of accrued all of these either consistencies or variations from available data, we identify whether or not that's going to be significant in terms of what that's going to do to the model prediction outcome, right? So, if you have clay in this area, but we're actually, there's supposed to be sand and we're looking over here, does that really matter? Yes or no? Probably not, right? Like as long as we qualify that this is the only predictive area of the model that we're actually looking at. So I know, hand waving probably isn't the best way to describe that, but,
Right,
we
I'm
could
not
do.
modelers. The hand
Yeah.
wave helps me.
Okay. All right. But essentially that's what it is. And really it's just a process of kind of going through each piece of that's a parameter that's been entered into the model and validating them all. And then just kind of noting in the conclusions whether or not we think that's going to be significant enough to impact the reliability of the predictions. So, and we make those summaries available. It's not a small amount of work. Megan is very, very kind, and also Jill, works hard to try to do that work. And it takes us a little bit of time to kind of do that sort of deep dive into the files that are submitted. But I think that it's worthwhile because it kind of gives everybody an understanding of exactly what we're trying to do.
Lena, can I do a follow-on on that just for Lena? I mean, can you give an idea, just without blowing this out into the discussion that you're not asking for, but the models committee that you're working on and things that you're working on in-house to sort of shorten that divide, or, so that consultants that are doing modeling, to the extent that we can be using guidance, I guess, of what to expect in developing those models. We've got multiple things in flight, right, that we'd like to finish up.
Yes, I want to say yes.
I mean, we got help me out here.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure where you're going, but
I'm trying to think. So transmissivity, the things that I'm not a modeler either.
Yeah.
The inputs, the modelers,
aquifer
properties, any number of those things, so that to the extent they can be known of how those are properly established, that outsiders are not guessing how the department's going to view those in reviewing a model. It seems like we've got several projects that the modeling committee's been working on, finishing up even hopefully shortly. Those are all going to feed into your question in my mind.
So and I guess that's kind of getting back to what you were talking about. Does what you're working on then kind of feed into Eagles?
What's the other one?
Okay.
We're working together.
Okay. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm sure a lot of more questions will come up, but I'm glad to say that the farmers are really excited about what they're hearing so far. Minus my login. Everybody gave a collective groan when I said they're going to have to start logging in to access the log tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the data will be available. It's just one of many sources that we'll be using. It's kind of, I mean, it's the same as having any other reference data or literature data that you would use to kind of verify what it is that you're looking at. So we'll take those estimates and within limitations. And then when we are going to use that, we'll share that with, whoever it is that wants to know. If they would like to be involved in the process, they're more than welcome. If not, then, that's fine too.
Okay.
It's kind of at their behest, really. So.
Okay.
So, moving on.
Yep. Okay. This is a map of the water management area depletion status as of June 4th. So currently, as of that date, we have 21 water management areas that are currently in Zone D that we are working on getting back out of Zone D or to the extent we can. Obviously, we're gonna have to prioritize based on severity and staff resources. Okay, statewide groundwater monitoring network status. Sydney, do you want to jump in?
Existing inactive USGS wells that we use to kind of initially build out our statewide network. So far, staff have in the field, and so we're working with Power's group to identify the current ownership of those wells and talk about transferring ownership to people where possible. And then there's another Eagle records, about 225 pre-existing inactive USGS wells that we're still trying to locate in the field to verify if they're still present. We have been working on putting out an RFP to contract some well rehabilitation work. So we finished the scope of work for that and are developing the RFP at the moment. That'll include resurveying the wells that we put in the network, completing repairs, if their concrete pads need to be replaced, redeveloping the wells, and then also, searching for those 225 unlocated wells that we believe are still out there. So lots of coordination with USGS on that. And we'll, a subset of these wells will ultimately be contributed to the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. So we have a grant from USGS that ends next month, it's July 14th, that our grant to become a new data provider for the national network ends. So we are in the final stages of finishing our web service, so provide the data to USGS. And at that time, we'll have 5 wells that'll go live to the national network. All 5 of those wells are in Allegan County, and they were put in by the Michigan Geological Survey. And MGS is going to be collecting the data. They'll provide it to Eagle, and then they'll send it over to USGS. But as I said, as we build out the statewide network, we'll assess in the wells that are appropriate. We'll also contribute them to the national network.
And for all you acronym lovers, RFP stands for Request for Proposals.
A 300 well request for proposal for wells that are located throughout the Upper and Lower Peninsula. So it should be published within a month or so, and it'll go through a contracting process for the people that want to bid on that work.
Okay, next is update on the updates to the water withdrawal assessment tool. So I'm going to be looking for Megan to jump in here.
So moving forward, obviously, here's a new draft of the homepage. Previously, this was the one that had all the little squares on it. It was kind of like hard to read. I don't know if any of you recall what that looks like. Where the picture here is a draft one. This is just a little bit easier to read and highlighted our links before it kind of just like text. So we're just kind of going through and tying up some loose ends and whatnot for most of the screens. You want to go to the next slide. But we have some big announcements. Obviously, we didn't have a release in June. We are extending that to mid-September. This will incorporate our the stream flow depletion tool capabilities that we're working hand in hand with USGS with. On this screen, here's a graph of what our map will look like. Another update we'd like to let you all know is previously we were kind of going with the interface that Ride mapper uses and like looks and feels. Due to essentially like what that application is built in, we went a different direction to go way more user friendly. We didn't have the same kind of data we needed to be like displayed. So if any of you are familiar with the Fish application, I think it's through DNR. Anyone? Yeah, okay. the Asbury project as well. It will be pretty similar to actually like what we currently have, so a little bit more user friendly and hopefully pretty familiar, but all the same like layers we talked about before, where you'll be able to see that active zone changes will still be available. But yeah, we're working on a new release date, like I said, for that mid-September, and still in progress with a lot of things. So that's pretty much it. We're kind of keeping it short and sweet for this one.
So the GIS work on the back end of this redevelopment ended up being a much larger lift, I think, than what previously had been anticipated. So that's one of the main causes for the delay. And it's most likely going to be released in 2 different releases now. So it'll be September, will be the first one, and then there'll be a second one with maybe additional capacities, in November. So, yeah.
Well,
So-
kind of. There'll be some changes, but we plan on having a lot of outreach to incorporate all the components at the time of the short.
Yeah, so we're hoping to maybe touch base here with you soon.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, I left the dates off of everything that
That was probably a smart choice. Okay.
Okay, and then finally, personnel notes. So good news, bad news. The good news is that the posting to fill the geologist 12 vacancy closed, and I've got a list of 11 responses that I've got to start screening. The bad news is that Marion is going to be leaving us. So hopefully that filling that position will get expedited. Her last day is June 20th. So that's what I've got.
All right. Just questions for Jen or? Future dates. So we have our August 12th coming up with Frank setting up Gun Lake. Thanks again, Frank, for that. We wanted to get head count by the end of the month and confirm that. So I guess if you know right away, if you could let us know whether you were in or out, that would certainly be helpful. If you need a little bit more time, let us know. But sooner we can get the head count, the sooner we can finalize those details of that meeting. Then we'll have October 14th and then close out December 9th to close out the year. Any other comments or thoughts on meeting dates?
I'll work with Frank and with Melissa and Bree to get a message out so that folks can just respond to it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For the August 12th meeting.
Perfect. All right. I don't think there's anything on formats or forum. So we'll open it up to comments. Any comments from those in the room? Online? Once? Oh, Todd. Thank you, Todd. You have the floor.
Oh, thank you for chance to speak here. I was going to drive up today, but 6 hours of driving for a few minutes to talk wasn't very conducive today. And I will say, I find myself in a position I really don't want to be in right now, but I also feel like I don't have much of a choice. And I feel even worse given the modeling discussion that we had just a few minutes ago. I have a couple comments to make, and my hope is by speaking up that perhaps we can all start on a productive discussion for some future work. The Dickinson Creek model SSR that was brought up previously was one that we've been working on. Started that work in 2020 and then submitted that model for review 3 years ago. And just this past month, or this month, actually finally got the final discussions and decision making on that finished. So it's been a 3-year wait on that. It's a small watershed. It's only 5 miles long. And the discharge is only 5 cubic feet per second, 2,100 gallons a minute. So it's a very small stream. When we submitted the numerical model of all of our field work, I was expecting some discussions. And what ended up happening was Eagle took the model and then made some changes to it that I wasn't a part of or we didn't discuss as it was going on. It's a 4-layer model, connectivity zones, and all 4 layers were changed. All the recharge zones were changed, and all the constant head boundaries were changed. The ratio of vertical to horizontal groundwater flow in that model, even in clays, we're looking at maybe a 1 to 1,000, 1 to 10,000 vertical to horizontal ratio. In other words, if it vertical drop in the water, if it moves 1 foot vertically, it'll move, up to 10,000 foot laterally in like clay layer. But the bedrock sandstone aquifer that we were pumping from in the new Eagle model, that ratio is 1 to 360,000. Equivalent, that would be 1 vertical foot of movement would be equivalent to 60 miles of horizontal movement. Clearly out of the range of what would be expected. One of the other issues we ran into was that recharge values for the model were decreased by 10 inches per year from what was in our model. Now there's about 38 inches of rainfall in that area. And the recharge in the Eagle model was somewhere between 4 to 7 for nearly all of the model area. We've submitted 12 stream bed connectivity tests. All 12 of them across this 5-mile stream showed that we had basically a negligible vertical connectivity, meaning extremely limited water movement across the stream beds. Those were not included in the model. We also had 12 velocity profile gain loss surveys we conducted, about 80 stream discharge measurements. We observed between 2 of the sites near the downstream end that averaging over the summer months for the last 3 years, 50% of the stream flow added to that stream occurred between those 2 sites. But the water temperatures actually increased 4 degrees at that same location, which told us that it couldn't be groundwater influx. It had to be surface water or warm water coming in. There's been no explanation offered for how that works. It's been assumed that it's all groundwater flow. And then when we got to the end of it, and we're talking to the client and with Eagle on a meeting, the Eagle staff had said, hey, the model, the BioWatt predicts about 44 gallons a minute depletion. Eagle's new model predicts about 6 gallons a minute depletion, but that's a steady state model. I said, well, that's not really appropriate considering these wells only pump 20 to 30 times a year, only 3 months out of the year. We really need to use a transient model. And said, look, if we change this to a transient model, here's the numbers. It's about a 90% reduction even further in depletion. So it dropped from 6 gallons a minute to about a third of a gallon a minute. That felt like a significant enough number that we should be looking at it. So these are all things that I'm just pulling out from the written review of our model, but then also in a document that was given to us that summarized their model. I haven't seen the Eagle model, was not participating with that. What made it really difficult for me was just the fact that when we sat in the meeting, it was relayed that it was just an update to our model, but it's not an update, it's a new model. That makes it really difficult for consultants to try to work together and to try to keep professional relationships up. It made it even more difficult. I didn't know it was coming. And in the meeting with the client was told that we had made errors in our field work but it wasn't shown what it was or said what it was. And they told the client we made a 3,000% error in our calculations, which even the client raised his eyebrow at that. So I say all of these things, not because I'm trying to embarrass anybody, not because we've got the right answers all the time, but if we really want to have professionalism in this, and if we really want to have discussions as we get into water users committees, and we really want to have productive discussions about how to fix some of the problems, if I never say anything, it never comes to light. We never know that there's an issue. So I'll end with my apologies if I'm stepping on toes. It's as uncomfortable for me to be here as I think everybody else. But I can either ignore the problem, and accept it. I can try to change the problem, or I can walk away and quit. And I think the best thing to do is to try to continue to work through this. We've dedicated 17 years to trying to answer some of these hard questions. I would much rather that we face some of the hard truths and we try to get some real answers coming out of that. And again, my hope, my genuine hope, is that we can have some productive discussions and try to get some things that are much more tenable as the water use in Michigan gets more restrictive and we start seeing water users committees and we start having to have a lot more of these harder conversations.
I appreciate your comments and I, quite frankly, some of it was difficult to hear in the room. So I understand that to you, it was very, real and specific stuff on what you're going through, but we kind of got the high level of what your concerns were, but I guess it sounds like you've got a dispute with Eagle and we certainly have some opportunities here to work through committees to try to, get toward the issues I think that you're struggling with, but I'm not sure what you want to Chief here to let us know that there's a issue with timeliness of SSRs and your client's concerns with this. We would, maybe if you want to put something more in writing and we could submit it to the group. If you want us to try to take something up, I'm happy to be here to listen, but I'm not sure exactly what you're after here.
Well, I'll speak up a little louder so everybody can hear. My hope is that by speaking up and shining a light on some of the issues that we face, that we can start having some productive discussions to avoid some of these problems before it ends up in court. I have never approached any of the committee here or the Water Use Council trying to relitigate a problem. This project is done and over. The decision's been made. The clients agreed to give up 2 wells to move water over. In my opinion, he shouldn't have had to. It doesn't matter what my opinion is. I'm not raising this to relitigate anything. I'm not raising this to embarrass anybody. I'm raising this because, number one, I think it's a problem. Number two, I don't think this is a very scientific method way to approach things. And number three, a lot of the behavior here leaves me no choice. This impacts my reputation, right? This impacts my ability to work with clients and how I'm viewed in that community as well. And I don't think it's being done fairly. So this body doesn't have any authority to make legal change. This body is an advisory body to the legislative committee. How do you give good advice if we don't understand what the problems really are? So I'm hoping for some productive discussions to come out of it, because I don't want to work like this, and no consultant wants to work like this in their career.
Pat,
sure.
This sounds like there's a couple of issues, aside from what you brought up about how much time it took to go through this process, which that is what it is. But I guess this kind of raises a concern for me, and definitely not trying to put anybody on the spot here, but it raises a concern for me that if there's a dispute at this level over, we submitted a model and data and then got something back completely different. what's the, I mean,
Well, so
what's the-
he's
what's the
referring
process?
to
What's
the,
the way forward?
sure, he's referring to the review that Eagle had completed, you know, I had done. And really, it was kind of a two-step process. There was a piece where we evaluated the model as I described before. And that's the first memo that Todd was referring to. And then there's a second piece in which, you know, we agreed to take ownership of that, Todd, through our negotiation, right? Like in those conversations that we were having over the last month. And we agreed to say that it wasn't a modified model and we didn't change our model, but we were doing our own modeling effort. And then that's documented in the second memo that he's referring to. And I mean, some of the stuff that he has mentioned, you know, that's all very familiar to me, right? Like, so I know where he's going with this and I know what was addressed in the memo and what we actually responded to. And so, I mean, my suggestion would be maybe to take it into a modeling subcommittee so that we can maybe hash out some of these differences that, you know, of opinion that we seem to be having over, or some of the documentation that was provided. You know, I'd be more than happy to provide that to anybody who's interested in seeing it. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's really detail oriented, but it does get back to the overall question of what you had before of how these models are reviewed, and that really the additional effort was done so that we could kind of honor our piece, right? We had it, as everybody heard, since 2020. And so to go back with a determination that the model wasn't sufficient really didn't seem adequate to kind of provide that feedback after 5 years. And so then I took time to actually update some of those pieces according to different literature references and evaluations that are all kind of spelled out in that second model. You know, there's reasons for each one of the changes that had occurred. And then, you know, use that model for estimates going forward, right? And in negotiation with Ceres and in discussion with Ceres, they were acceptable with the state of the model as we had gotten it to. And we were able to identify a solution to their withdrawal, you know, or their SSR, right? And that's ultimately what we were there to do.
Okay, so if I understand, so if I understand this right.
It's not a back and forth. This is just an open.
Oh, sorry.
Nobody has-
Oh.
I guess.
Okay.
They don't want to-
Sure.
I guess I'm just kind of trying to inquire as to, you know, how do we take this to the next?
Yes, I appreciate your willingness to engage on this. Is
Yeah.
maybe if Dave would be interested in taking it up in models, that it could be a case study type of thing where you can get into the weeds on this. Because I mean, Todd obviously has some strong opinions on those assumptions. Modeling is part art and science. You know, it's where to put the guardrails, and so I'm sure people would love to get into the weeds on this, and it sounds like Todd would really like to get into the weeds on this, and if you're willing to, then if you're willing to be voluntold to.
No, sorry, Dave.
Have a venue.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to is probably have a conversation with Todd. This is what they're looking for. And I think there's a couple of ways we could go. One is process oriented, procedure and how she handles it. The other thing is the particular technical details of this project. We do either or both.
And they're both probably equally important. Yeah, it shouldn't take 3 years, but there's probably reasons why it did. So, great.
Well, and I mean, Todd, I definitely don't want to put words in your mouth here, but it sounds like there might be a dispute over both the modeling and the data. So I mean, I almost wonder if the two work groups want to get together to discuss this more in detail.
Let me be really clear. Again, I am not trying to relitigate any case. I am hoping that we can learn from cases as we go forward and as things get more complicated. But I don't see us being able to learn if nobody is aware of what's going on.
So I hear talking about the process. And I think that'd be a good thing to do. I mean, I think there's interest in going to the technical, but I'm not sure, you know, what we come out of it, right, necessarily help the funds.
Right, it could just be used to help us lead forward the discussion of the process, but.
Yeah,
don't
well, and the
forget-
bigger question of how do we do this,
Right.
you know, for the next case and the next one and the next one.
That's all fair for us to work on that. And the question that I asked Lena and did a horrible job of asking earlier is, as an observer of this for many years, like the model inputs, the aquifer properties, whether it's static or transient, all those things end up being frustration points. And then how you collect data for stream bed conductance, all these things end up being, I don't think Lena liked your art comment there, but it's science. I mean, there is a best practice for establishing each of those, and that seems to me like the age-old issue between conflict between two modelers, or you can probably have 6 modelers do this, and you're still going to have some measure potentially of conflict. But I think it's fair, and we certainly don't want to litigate this here. I mean, department's comfortable with what we did, the data we collected, and the work we did, but confident in enough. Glad we're not going to court. Sometimes we're going to end up having to go to court, but certainly as a case study to deconstruct it and see what we can learn, both for implications in this watershed, as far as what we can learn in how to improve process, seems fair.
The decision's made that, this particular site-specific review is closed. To kind of to your point, the idea of let's figure out how this works better in the future, whether that's a different process or whether it's, figuring out how do we make sure that applicants who are submitting data and submitting models know what they need to do and how does, and what the department needs to do. Okay.
So as
What you're
someone
talking
who
about,
didn't.
what you're talking about right now is exactly what my hope is and has been for it to come out of this.
He's saying that this is exactly what he's hoping for, is for us to start thinking about how to move forward.
Well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate your comments.
So as someone who didn't understand like the technical details and what was being displayed, I think this goes back to what Laura was talking about earlier. So as someone who sits on this council, and I'm not a modeler, and half of this technical stuff is really, it just takes me a long time to at least scratch the surface and to understand. It was surprising to me that it was 3 years in the making to get to a decision. And I don't know what led to that, but that was a little bit revealing as someone who is charged as a member of this council. We're here to put together basic policy recommendations that go to the legislative body. And I guess it's really puts us in an awkward position that if we don't really understand what's happening, how can we make good recommendations? So having these discussions, I think, are good and important, no matter how awkward they are for all of us here. But this goes back to what you were saying, Laura, earlier about understanding what the process is, because farmers do want to know that. If ultimately we need to build trust with the people who are putting in these wells and turning in data. And so having a good process that's transparent, that has that, I'll use the word maybe accountability, right, for both sides. Having, I don't know if you guys have groups of people that peer review your work, and kind of being open about those things. And it all goes back to the process. So we can take a look at the process. I think that sounds like that's a reoccurring theme that everybody's open to doing.
Yeah. Okay. Dave, if you'd be willing, when you plan to meet to discuss this, can you work with the team at Eagle and with Melissa and Bree to make sure that invitation gets out to everybody? Because there might be folks beyond the modeling committee who would have interest in.
Most everybody's.
Right?
And I guess this is kind of thing that we want the whole model committee plus whoever else. That's been pretty large group. Is that do we need to discuss it at that scale, or maybe start there and say that we want to focus on certain things and get a smaller work group? I'm just trying to think how you manage.
I definitely don't want to tell you how to run your group. And I think that there's probably folks who are at least interested in listening to the discussion beyond just the regular folks who show up at your committee,
I will put out,
which is not an answer, but.
I will put out. I'll send, well, you can copy. You send that to anybody else, the rest of the county.
Okay.
I got a pretty good email list already. Great. And then. So, and then I will talk with Lena, I will talk with Todd too. That's parameters. At least some guidance as to where we're gonna go with this.
Okay.
Todd, if you or others in the future have issues, you feel free to contact any of the tri-chairs. We could fit some of these topics in as an agenda item if it's worthy of more of a discussion, but I do appreciate bringing it up during public comment, so thanks. Anything else?
I apologize for dropping a hornet's nest and kicking it.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. We're all friends here, so we'll move on.
Inside voice.
We are all friends.
Everything's good here. You can't see all the faces around, so, but it wasn't directed at you, so all good. So with that, any other comments or anything else for the panels? All right. We'll call this meeting closed then. Hour to spare.
Thanks, everyone.
Done late.
Don't worry, Tom, you're definitely my.
It's all right. No, is it all right?
This?
No, I